All right. What's up, everyone who's tuning in? Um, I always like to check over here and just make sure that it is actually going to YouTube. There's a little delay. Just want to make sure this guy is coming through this streaming portal thing. I also like to let people kind of trickle in. Looks like we're almost here. Looks like it's basically happening. That's right. All right, cool. So here we go. Welcome. I'll do a little preamble before Txgen comes in. Yeah. What's new? Just it's just settling into this daily grind shit or not grind. Fucking it's like this shining shit over. I'm not killing everyone yet, but yeah, basically been writing. Been back to I've been thinking about the Psalms Zero tour. They had cut in half. The tour with KO. I've had like 4 games about that. It's very very sad. I still more in that. I'm already writing stuff for the new Psalm Zero, the next Psalm Zero, and it sucks because it's like we're not gonna really get to tour on Sparta, It's just like not even really. I mean, maybe we will. Maybe if this thing gets lifted and works out soon, then we'll get to actually finish out that album cycle, but it may just drag on so long that I got to just make the next one. I may have to make the next one totally solo with amp simulators. Just get ready for this kind of shit. Or maybe I'll send files to someone in New York and have them reamp it, do some reamping. We'll see. I'm trying to get the long game, if in fact it is a long game, sorted out. So anyway, the guest today, Txgen Meyer, one of my newish past year internet only friends, although we've hung in real life actually several times at this point, but we met online, and she's just absolutely brilliant young person who's doing work as a theorist, but connected with music and the art world, and yeah, she's really really deep on Deleuze, who keeps coming up on this show. I want to keep it. She's very into Deleuze, very into Sun Ra, and I want to get. I definitely want to get the Sun Ra stuff happening with her, but yeah, she's gonna sandblast you with ideas. So let's see. Is she in there? Yeah, she's there. Let's add you in. What's up, Txgen?
Howdy. Also, sorry if my internet's like delayed at all. I'm having weird internet problems all week, so
It seems all right. Yeah, it seems that you can hear me. You can hear me all right.
yeah.
Cool. And yeah, anyone in the chat, as always, let me know if something's messy on that end. How are you hanging in there?
I'm
How are you
doing
surviving?
okay. I'm doing okay. I'm in LA now, so it's not like the end of the world for me. If I was like where I lived before, it would be a little bit sadder because it would just be like suburb vibes constantly and like no escape, and that would be horrible. But
Yeah, yeah, that was super. We had a nice hangout there, but it was definitely like mall, right? We went to like Chipotle or
mhm,
something or what? Yeah,
I don't remember. I
yeah,
think we got tea and ate
yeah. We
macaroni.
got tea. It was in the mall zone. So yeah, that's awesome. You're in LA proper now. That's
Yeah.
good. Cool. Well, I don't know. Should we let's okay. We want to get into actual deep shit, right? So like we don't want to go too full on biography vibe, right? But like I don't know, if you were just gonna like explain to my let's say my viewership, let's say some of them don't know you and they're music people who also know something about philosophy, but they're not like, scholars or whatever, but maybe some are. But
Yeah.
yeah, what would you say your background is creatively, intellectually, just like your trip that has brought you to where you're at?
Yeah, I can give like a little brief rundown.
Yeah,
So
elevator pitch, just to
yeah, I was trained in music as a kid, went to visual and performing arts schools as early as elementary school. And, I've known like music very closely and intimately. I played brass, particularly trumpet, uh, you know, um, And so I've always had a very close relationship with music. I don't play anymore. I kind of do weird synth things on my computer and then don't share them with anyone. But
Yeah, you kept hinting that you had some stuff, but then
I
no.
yeah, I well, I made things and then I just didn't follow through with getting them mastered. Um,
No shame there.
so yeah,
We can't
because
follow
it's
through on every project, you know.
no. Even though I had someone lined up for it, it just didn't work out. But nonetheless, I guess I call myself a musician, but what I mean by music is very expanded. I call myself a musician in the way that Sun Ra says that all creative art is music, and so for me, like I use a very expanded definition of music, which for Ra means like everything vibratory is of different degrees of music. That's the way he puts it. And so I deal with the vibratory. And what that means is effectively I deal with things that, in like the Lozakatarian terms, I deal with like the construction of refrains, right? Um,
Okay, okay. So talking about Deleuze and Guattari, everyone's got to check that out. As far as yeah, you're talking about refrains. I just watched your video I rewatched your video on the refrain. It's awesome. It really great. Like yes, so anyone doesn't know, yeah, A Thousand Plateaus. That's the Deleuze and Guattari book. They wrote it together, Deleuze and Guattari. Um, and yeah, so and yeah, they have this chapter of the refrain, which is and so yeah, how does let's just do it. Let's just talk about it. So what is yeah the vibratory and refrains? What's
yeah. So I mean, I'll give you an option here. I can either do the hardcore De La Zacatarian route, or I can like dance around the topic and talk about Raw a bunch. Which would you prefer? It would be hard
can
for me to mix the two.
it would be hard for you to mix. Okay,
I
well,
can
well
try my best, but
can you do Raw and then do the hardcore Deleuze
I can
after
do
that, but
that.
not at the
Yeah.
same time? Let's do that because I have some sense because people use the word vibration a lot and it can mean all kinds of things from something very material and literal all the way to something like so sort of flaky that it's like not really able to be talked about.
Yeah.
And I got some yeah like yeah start with Raw because he's the musician.
Yeah. So with Raw, we get like a lot of writing on sound. I can show you the text. It surprises people how thick it is. Like it's pretty thick of like just full
Oh yeah,
of prose and literature, and I have all my lovely
not a girl.
markings up in it. And Ra wrote an enormous amount of literature on music and on how he believed music is to be composed. And so he deals with this word vibratory in very material terms. One of the ways that we'll think through vibration, if we just think through how like his performance worked, right? Obviously, there is the sound, obviously, but there was so much more for Raw here. First of all, there was a question of how do we position the all of the performers and the dancers? Just where do they sit? Because for Raw, different vibrations, and I mean this is true in physics as much as it is in sociology, that when we put things in different places, they interact differently and they have different ways of coming together. And so when we think about this vibration here, we're thinking about these like oscillatory patterns that keep coming up, whether it be like, oh, my body is still here today and continues to be here, and there continue to be certain aspects of my body which are here. Or there is like the question of, oh, this instrument is to be played repetitively in this specific place at these times, right? Vibration for Ra takes this very wide open scope of oscillations which carry like two different aspects of them. On the one hand, they repeat themselves over and over again, and you find them happening all the time. And on the other hand, they have an element to them that both Ra and Deleuze use this word. I love it. Rhythm. right?
Yes, right. Rhythm as right, because yeah, like right, rhythm versus meter. That meter is not the this meter is not the same thing as rhythm, although they interact, of course. But
Yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah. So what's the difference between meter and rhythm, or rhythm
yeah.
in this sense?
So I mean there's we can go into like the hardcore theory part of it is that the difference between rhythm and meter, if you look at someone like Bergson, right, you're going to get an idea of temporality. And we have different modes of temporalization embedded in these different schema. With regards to meter, we have, sorry, we have a mode of temporalization that Bergson refers to as them or time, right? Uh,
Okay, I'm sorry to keep stopping you, but just so people know, because different like so Bergson, Henry Bergson, yeah, Creative Evolution, one of his books. I love him. He's awesome. Yeah, Deleuze is
yeah,
very influenced by Bergson. So he's okay. So sorry.
no,
So
you're fine. Yeah,
temporalization through Bergson. All right.
yeah, and so when we think through time, and this of course plays a huge role in how we think through vibrations, because vibrations are always through time, right? We don't ever have like an oscillation which just happens in two places at once. It doesn't work in math. Um, and so this notion of time, this notion of temporalization that we get with regards to them, as he calls it, TEMPS, right? It's the French word for time. Um, in this mode of temporalization, we have a very quantitative, divisible way of thinking through things.
Yeah,
The
units.
idea, yeah, the idea is you can measure it, right? Um, and we have a second mode of temporalization that Bergson comes up with here, durée, right? Duration,
Yes.
right? And so duration here is this time of experience, this time of, you know, more than like a time of events, it's a time of our understanding and knowledge of things, because clearly we cannot measure our experiences of or our knowledges of different things, right? And so this lack of ability to measure it, this pure qualitative factor to it, um, makes up a big part of what rhythm is, right? Um, because meter works again in a very divisible way. I mean, as it is, right? But with rhythm, we get something which again has these two facets to it, which it repeats itself, and you see it repeating itself, but it doesn't repeat itself on the one in three every time, right?
Yeah.
And so all of these different modes of bringing things together, right? Anytime you get a syncopated rhythm, you're going to have these variations which show themselves. And these variations are so extreme that we would say that it produces some kind of difference, right? It makes things a little bit more detached than they were, right? Because they're no longer lodged together by meter now. They're no longer lodged together by the quantitative. And
So
so,
so I understand. Like, see, to me, I've checked out that Bergson, like that stuff about time duration versus time. I sort of, as far as rhythm, like if you have polyrhythms going, right, that's like a very metrically measurable thing.
mhm,
But then if you're talking about like what rhythm is within that, or as a byproduct, or as a thing, like is that something that you can like is that describable other than sort of coming at it from very like uh how concrete is that? Like how like could you
yeah.
describe what a rhythm is in that, or is it more this sort of flow that runs through it that's almost mystical, and we have to sort of obliquely come at it through like sort of oblique language?
Well, and so
Does that question kind of
this is the question. This is the part when I go, all right, Sun Ra isn't enough. Now we need the Lazengatari, right? Because Sun Ra doesn't have too many answers for that. For him, it is kind of you have to feel it and you have to know it and you have to be trained to know it. But for the Lazengatari, things are a little bit more concrete. And in the Lazengatari, what we get with regards to rhythm is that we know that rhythm is embedded in a process that we call transcoding, right? Um, Transcoding is something that is central to I'm just going to throw out a bunch of words here. Tell me if I need to add more. But
Yeah. I'm gonna keep interrupting you. I hope I do it in a way that's just sort of enriches stuff to kind of bring it to what people get. You know what I'm saying? Because I don't want to. I want to presuppose a certain amount of familiarity with stuff, but not too much. You know, and I also got to do it for my own brain. So, please.
yeah, I understand. So in this process of transcoding, it takes place in what we call a milieu, right? And what a milieu is just this word code effectively means a thing that repeats itself, right? We know how central repetition is to Deleuze's project. And so code is just the aspect of a milieu, and milieu here in English translates to something between like a middle and like environment.
Yeah, it's like a realm. Like
Yeah.
yeah.
It's like an environment that you're between, kind of, right?
Yeah. In the midst of
And the idea of this middle, it is a big emphasis on this movement between, because since milieus are composed of code, right? They're constantly embedded in this process of transcoding. Transcoding means just another word that they give it is transduction, right? It's this change from one state to another. It's this movement from one milieu to another, right? Or if it's not a movement from one milieu to another, it's the employment of a milieu as the basis for another, right?
Okay, so so code. You're talking about a milieu has code or is defined by code, and so code is measurable, quantitative, number-ish patterns. Is that roughly like?
Roughly, yeah.
Like meter, when we're talking about meter versus rhythm in music, meter would be like code. Is that
yeah,
rough, like comparable? Okay.
Like code in its raw state, yeah. But then when we get into this element of transcoding here, this movement that we add here, right? This is when we start to get closer to something that is more rhythmic. Because what we've done now is we show that either, generally speaking, something serves as the basis for another, right? And so we see how these repetitions layer, and we see how they affect one another very directly. And where they gain their, let me rephrase that. These milieus get embedded into this process of transcoding, which then gains what we would call like an expressivity, right? They are able to, before this point, they don't really express themselves. They don't really come out of their shells. They are what they are in the material. But then they move into a space of expressivity. And this expressivity that they gain allows for them to develop what we call territorialization. Everybody knows deterritorialization, but what has to happen first is
I don't think everyone does, Txgen. I'm not going to say come down to earth because that is so obviously not what this is all about.
No.
But if we're talking about, okay, like code, so you're talking about codes get expression.
Right.
Codes get their expression by creating territories.
Yeah.
Is that about okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Are there musical are there like direct musical parallels for this? We don't need to do that, but I'm just interested in like making it like if you're a musician checking this out, right? Like if the code of a milieu is like something that's very sort of a stricter, more metric thing. And you said rhythm is sort of transcoding is sort of like the rhythmic aspect. Is that roughly?
Yeah.
So like
I feel like I might not do this example total justice, but if we have like just like a standard 4/4 meter, right, which serves as a code, right? It repeats itself very rigorously, right? Insofar as it's lodged into a certain number of beats per minute, blah blah blah, right? And it's lodged into all of these processes and territories, which are composed by it, right? And so transcoding steps in here when we get like like I'll write this out. You can share it in chat. How about that?
Okay.
I'll write out a like I'm like writing
This
out
is
like a
sick. Okay.
rhythm pattern. um,
Oh wait, so how do I share that in chat? You're gonna
I'm typing into the private chat, and then you can like I don't know if you can
oh
send it
word.
to the live
Oh word.
comments.
Okay. Yeah. I'm gonna do that. Okay,
Um,
cool. So this is gonna be a rhythmic code
yeah.
or like a code pattern for rhythm. Okay.
Sorry, this is just
By the way, I also realize that not every single one of these concepts is just like I understand you can't just graft this shit on to like literal music, just like 1 2 1, boom, there it is. Like, like I get that. I'm interested in wrangling it though, as much as possible to examples that a musician who doesn't read those would kind of be able to feel. So okay, so here's this code that
I did my best to like in the comment there like show like in the parenthesis here is like when like a beat would be played, right? Um
okay, so yeah, it's like one, yeah, so that'd be like, like 1 2 and 3 4. Wait, so things are played just on the, okay, just where the parentheses are is where
yeah,
the
yeah,
thing would happen, right? So that'd be like 1 2 and 3 4 1 2 3 and 4, right.
right.
Oh, the clave, very nice.
Yeah.
Isn't that
right.
clave or something? Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this element of transcoding here, right? Clearly we don't have a repetition which flows perfectly into like every third beat, right? Because after the third you have two in between, right? Um or
Wait, so
yeah.
we say, wait, after the third beat you have two.
You have
Wait, say that again.
three spaces. Sorry, I misspoke. Because I forgot
Oh,
to put an extra beat after the four there, so I just counted two. But um, if you like count it out right,
right.
yeah. So
You didn't put the and after that four.
I didn't put
After
the and.
yeah.
And so if you were to just count it, I mean, surely you can count it and you can measure it, right? It's not the greatest example ever, but you do see that there's a variation on just playing every third eighth note, right?
Right.
Now we have a variation in there that adds this third eighth note rest after the third note you play, right? And that small little change actually changes how like the experience of the rhythm plays out, right? It changes so much about what makes the rhythm what it is.
I see what you mean. Yeah, so it's like, right. So what you're saying, it's like every, right, all of the hits are on every third eighth note
Mhm,
except that gap in the middle. That's
mhm.
four eighth notes. One, two. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Yep. And so you're saying that little variation within it is kind of like a line of flight? No.
Yeah, maybe
Yeah.
we're
That's a
inching
Deleuzian.
there.
That's a Deleuzian term, line of flight. Okay, so cool. Okay, so wait, so keep going with that. What
Yeah,
yeah, so you've got a code and there's this little irregularity within the code. You've got a
right.
block of code that has
And
a
so
variation in the middle of it.
And so clearly there is a code which it is based off of, right? On the one hand, it's based off of meter very clearly because it is just eighth notes that are being played at different times, right? But that code only serves as a basis of this insofar as it determines the number of like eighth notes that there are in each meter, right? The actual employment of the eighth note comes from a different code, which is now lodged into this, which is playing one eighth note for every three of them, right? And so
Okay.
the change that we have to make here in order to fit this into a 2 meter bar, like 2 bars, right, would be that you have to add somewhere in this, you have to add an extra eighth note rest somewhere, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And so that interplay here is that process of transcoding, where we have code does serve as the basis of this, and you can see it serves as the basis of this. I didn't make something here that goes extremely far outside of what meter can represent, right? However, it does still perform variations on it, and then because of the code which serves as the basis of it, it has to perform certain transcoding elements of it, right? Which change its expressivity and which change the territory which it serves. So if I were to change the meter, then it would change entirely what this rhythm would have to be in order to fit into, a regular number of bars.
Okay. So there's two codes. There's the every third eighth note code, and then there's the like 2 bars of eighth notes code. And so in order to make one code fit into the other code, there has to be this little variation, and that variation itself is transcoding, and therefore that's a quote unquote rhythmic aspect rather than a metrical aspect.
Yes.
Like the sort of right. Okay. So right. So it's like rhythm isn't like a thing. It's not an object. It's a sort of process of transcoding, or
exactly.
It's a vector. It's like a vector of change.
Yeah.
Between two. Okay. Okay. Sick. And so then so a territory is kind of like how these two things become one vibe, or
well, a territory would be if I were to get out a snare drum and play this on it, right? Now it's developed an expressivity because it's been lodged into an instrument now. It's no longer just different milieus that we're playing with, right? Now it develops expressivity, and it develops particularly what we would say qualities, right? Something that we did not up to this point fully have. We didn't have qualities until you clapped it out, right?
Yeah.
And so these qualities that it develops, I could go into like the intricacies of all of the qualities, but no. These qualities that it develops lead to its process of territorialization going on and on to the point of a territory being created. And there are many types of territories. The one that makes the most sense for people is the existential territory, because an existential territory is the territory that we live in. It's your neighborhood, it's your home, your bedroom, your bed, however small you have to go to find something that is your existential territory, the place that you reside, right? That is as much a result of the process of territorialization as anything else.
Okay.
And
this guy, are you checking the comments here? This guy says something about it. The very first essential for success is a perpetually constant and regular employment of violence. That's totally, that's not, that's dark and not really on topic particularly, but okay. So I don't know, we could bring it back around to Ra. Is that how Sun Ra, did he have a particular way of sort of employing like rhythm versus meter, rhythmic, like transcoding and territory, placement of bodies in space? Like
he very much does. And so Ra has an equation. Ra's whole system is based off of these long equations that he drew up and employs in his world. One of the equations that he has is his most essential one. He says, the way he prefaces it always is, remember the 3 O's. That's the way he refers to it. And so I'll write it out for you. But it's quite simple, right? It's O plus O equals OS, or OS, right? And this seems like a very simple thing, right? However, I think this here encapsulates transcoding very perfectly, because what does Ra mean first by this O, or the circle, what it is, right? This circle for Ra represented, on the one hand, Earth, and he very much uses the word territory actually directly with regards to the O, and or with regards to the circle. And so he also refers to the circle as being heaven. He refers to and says that Earth is the third heaven, right? However you want to frame it, whatever vocabulary you want to use.
What is second? What?
Oh,
It's he says Earth is the third heaven. What's the first and second, or is that a?
It's the planets.
Okay, right, just the okay,
yeah.
Okay, so all the planets are heavens. Okay, right.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Cool.
And so, whatever vocabulary you want to give it, right? This circle is just the territory, right? Or is just code, right? It is something which repeats itself insofar as it, you can see its repetitions and you can experience its repetitions, blah, blah, blah. The second O we get, you can assume is a different territory, right? Obviously, we're not adding the same territories together. And so the question that we get here is what happens when we take these two territories and meld them? I won't go like too deep into the Ra lore on this because there's a lot there. But in this OS, one of the most interesting things we get is that Ra very much was into numerology. And this S comes much later in the alphabet than O does, right? So what we would say is that it's productive of some type of surplus in order for it to move numerically from O to S. And so instead of being presented with two O's at the end of here, when we take two territories and add them together, we produce a type of surplus. In Deleuze-Guattarian terms, this is the surplus value of code, right? And so that surplus value gets translated into a change in the O, which makes it now an S, right? We could say that in what Ra does here, when he looks at this os, right? If you were to pronounce it that way instead of os, he goes back to old Egyptian text and somewhere finds that os is the word for mouth or opening, right? And so if you think about it in terms of opening in particular, because he uses both words here, and I love that he adds them both at the same time, because opening is a very nice word for transcoding, right? Because what transcoding does is it opens up a territory. It opens up a code. And so this small little silly equation actually does provide us with like a way of thinking through transcoding a little bit. And it's central to Ra's practice.
Okay. So as like with numerology, like when I think of just what numerology is, I just think of on the most basic level, just that numbers have a qualitative essence beyond the quantitative. I mean, is that like just on the most basic level?
Yeah.
I would
basically
like, I mean, not like, yeah, I mean, yeah, just that they have qualities beyond their function as numbers, that there's a qualitative, right? So yeah, is that sort of the vibe of that, like when you add O plus O, the reason it becomes O plus the surplus value is basically the quote unquote more than the sum of its parts element, but that isn't numerically, it isn't quantitative. It's not quantitatively more than the sum of its parts. It's qualitatively more than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, it can be quantitatively, but it's not a requirement that it be, and it's not all the time, right?
Right. Okay. So and so with Ra, are we talking about Oh, okay. You know, sorry. Okay, so keep going with that. Like for Ra, like what would be territories added? What would be territories that are added together, and then are more than, and then have that surplus of code?
Well, the classic example in Ra is that you take the Earth and you take Saturn and you add them together and you get somewhere else.
Okay.
Right? Because Ra came from Saturn, and he's here from Saturn to take the people of Earth and push them somewhere else. And in his idea, this happens by this process of transcoding, right? Just like in Deleuze and Guattari, we approach the cosmos by deterritorializing, right? And so it's the same cosmic that we get, that Ra is effectively claiming that music or vibration, this expanded definition of music, has transportative qualities to it. right? Um, and so these transportative qualities of music, the clearest example of it is dance, right? Uh, 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 Obviously dance makes the body move. And so one can turn there, and a lot of people just end there. But Ra truly meant that music would take Earth and transport it, right? That's why at the very beginning of Space is the Place, his most popular film, he talks about how the way he got here is by sound. The way he got here was by music, and they come playing their instruments as they approach, right? Um,
Yeah.
when people ask how are we going to leave, his answer is that through music, right? Some people use all of these other advanced techniques. For him, it is music. And so this transportative quality really comes from transcoding and really comes from this equation here, because it is this idea that if we take these two territories, if we take the existence of life on Saturn as Ra claims it to be, which is effectively like a communist utopia, that I mean the way he puts it, there's no money, no one gets paid for anything that they do because everyone already has everything that they want, right?
Okay, the political implications. Yeah, I never really thought about him with respect to politics, one way or the other. But so he is kind of communist in a sense, or
I would
that's a
say
spirit
so.
of.
Right. I mean, he was supported by the Black Panther Party for like 10 years. They protected
Really?
him on tours.
Did not. Okay. Were people trying to assassinate Ra?
I don't
Fucking.
know.
That would be fucking dude. That would be dark. But
That would be pretty
interesting.
dark.
He was supported by Panthers. Although it's funny because I know that his band, I mean the orchestra, I know that they sort of lived and worked under what could be sort of communal communist conditions, but also
Mhm.
somewhat dictatorship ish, right? I mean
Yeah.
he's like a little Stalinish maybe a little bit, but word. So like okay, so as far as there's something though about I was listening to your I was listening, checking out the refrain thing, and it was talking about space, not space as in outer space, but space as in actually like physical, three-dimensional space. There was something in there where it said that at a certain things are territorialized when they take up space, or no, or was it that code takes up space but rhythm does not? There was something about the establishment of things in three dimensions versus when things are more like intense and not delineated in space. Does that ring a bell? There's something in there about that. I don't know.
I
Maybe that
it doesn't ring a bell. I
maybe it was something about like duration versus time. How like time is like measured time is like when time is sort of conceived of in space, whereas like duration is sort of more intense and like not measured out in space, like three
that
dimensionally.
seems fair. Yeah, yeah. I may
That's
have
yeah,
heard
like
that.
something like along those lines. Yeah. Yeah, Bergson was very exciting to me. I mean, that whole stuff about that shit about like Zeno's paradox and just the sort
Mhm.
of like movement of the arrow. Um, yeah, I have my own vibes, but I talked about a little bit in my vlog, Rock Rocks, about smooth versus melodic sensibility, sort of the measured versus the unbroken. Um, let's let's get into like what was the this is good. We've got the Ra and Deleuze things. I'm feeling this. Wait, let's see. One of these questions though. Okay, so does this Travis Touchdown asks, does this transcoding tie into the Deleuzian idea of difference?
Yeah,
You mentioned the
absolutely.
word difference. Yeah, you mentioned the word difference before, which I know for Deleuze and just for all these sort of like second half of the 20th century thinkers, difference is a word that is key in just how are we going to negotiate difference in various ways. Or is it going to be resolved or made into the same, or what we do with difference? So yeah, what's the vibe? How's transcoding go with difference?
Yeah. So what we'd say about this is that transcoding goes with difference in a very direct way, right? Obviously, transcoding is productive of difference, right? And we would say that it is essentially productive of difference. But then there's this question of like, what kind of difference? What does this mean, right? And Deleuze here is very particular, right? Difference means, in his words, right, the very beginning of difference and repetition, it's different but not opposed, right? Um, and that
Yes,
phrase
yes,
really
yes.
stings true with it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, but that's not the OS. That's not exactly the surplus. This sort of thing of surplus of code, or I mean,
It is really this surplus value is what we would say is productive of difference within code, right? Um, I can give like another, like the classic example of surplus value of code, right? Is the example of the orchid and the wasp, right? That we have. There's a specific type of orchid which is pollinated by insect and relies on insects for its pollination process to continue. And the reason it relies on the insects to do this is because it makes itself look like them, right? It makes itself look like the underbelly of the insect that it wants to attract. And then the insect, feeling pretty excited by that, goes and fucks the flower. Gattari has a beautiful passage where he describes this in great detail. I'll spare you the details, but
the French, man, it's got to be erotic. It's got to be just arrows shot through with arrows.
um, but it's a case of transcoding because without the orchid changing its appearance and producing a difference within itself in order to change its appearance over time evolutionarily, right? That this wasp that comes in and helps pollinate it, right? It is in Gattari's words, that he does it just for fun and gets nothing out of it, right? Um, and it's this lack of something that's received on the part of the wasp, but the change which comes in for the orchid, because clearly the wasp does not need the orchid to survive. Uh, uh, so it's that type of a relationship here that starts to make transcoding look a little bit like difference is all over it, right? Because surplus value is the process, is what's being produced by this process of.
So it's kind of like you're saying, because the wasp is doing this quote unquote just for fun and not for. There's something about it that's not an exchange. Like it doesn't have this equivalent exchange where like the wasp fucking the flower, at least from the wasp's point of view, is not a zero sum sort of quid pro quo thing. It's just a sort of combination of the wasp's desire and the orchid.
The
The orchid
orchid
produces different. Sorry, go ahead.
the orchid ensures its survival and ensures its ability to reproduce, right? And the orchid also changes itself in order to ensure that. And it changes itself constantly to develop with the evolutionary decisions that were made on the part of the wasp, right?
Okay, yeah. Okay, so yeah, so the wasp and orchid territories or codes, when they combine, there's this extra thing that now is in excess. Okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. What's the difference between difference and just change? This would be interesting to me, like just thinking about just musically, because I know those two words don't mean the same thing.
Yeah.
Um,
I think
I don't know. Yeah.
the clearest difference between them might be that difference takes place in a process of repetition. It still is embedded in the process of repeating itself, right? What we
Okay.
would say is that it's the repetition of difference, right? Just the production of any type of change, right, would not necessarily constitute the production of difference. If we think about like um, just this is the only example that comes to my mind immediately. The Democratic Party's policies changing over the past 8 years. Like, the party itself did not change. The people who control the party didn't really
Right.
change.
Right. It's like changing based on just like this one code. It's not a territory that's being added
It's
to or interfacing with
it's
another
not
territory. It's only
drawing.
changing as far as
Yeah, it's changing itself,
it's just running
right?
its own system.
Mhm,
It's
mhm.
running its own code. It's not combining with other uh
Exactly.
it's not combining with other territories to create surplus value.
Yeah.
Um Marcus Kane asks, how can one apply these ideas to personal thought or action? Well, this is a question and critique made of all kinds of super far out philosophy. I'd say this is for all of us to kind of chew on and just well, I'll say this before Txgen takes this. Um, I mean, I do know that one of Deleuze's big things was just that the point of philosophy is is the question, how might one live, right? It's like less about what's true and false and more about how might one live. Um, so I don't know if that means that we have answers to Marcus's question or that we don't have answers. Um, how would yeah, I mean, how would what we were just talking about, how would that, what kind of implications would that have for how might one live, or does that have implications for how Ra lived?
It
Um,
does. I mean, I'll answer the questions in order of how I receive them. So, how it changes how we might live, right? There's a lovely text. It's very short. I would make the Jody Dean log theory joke. It's under 100 pages, so read it. But
Never mind. Okay.
yeah, it goes
That's
like
good
love
for me. My attention span is just ravaged over the past 10 years. So yeah, under 100 pages is my
under
level.
100 pages, so you just read it. No, it's by Maurizio Lazzarato. It's called Marcel Duchamp and the Refusal of Work. And it's a text about Duchamp, right? But it's also a text about Duchamp's life. And it's a text about how Duchamp lived in the world. And this text is important to thinking through how we think through life here, because what Lazzarato makes the claim is that Duchamp employed life in such a way that Deleuze and Guattari would have been more than happy with it. And they were, right? And they were inspired by Duchamp. And Duchamp plays a critical role, especially in Guattari's, of how we think through art. And so in the text, what the key takeaway is that Duchamp refused to work, right? And not only did he refuse to work in a sense of he refused to take employment, but also he refused to work in a sense of his art was not a work of labor, right? If we think about
Right.
the classic Duchamp works, right, we have The Fountain, which is a urinal taken from a store, turned upside down, signed with a name that was not his own from a comic book, given a date,
Yes.
and then taken a picture of because it didn't even get into the exhibit, and we lost it. And replicas were made of it, right? We don't
Yeah.
know where
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
original is, right? Um, this is very much a case where Duchamp did not, in classical terms, work to produce this, right? We generally call it a work of art, and that is where a lot of this contention comes up in considering Duchamp an artist, particularly when you think about like when Duchamp was alive, how much contention
Yeah.
there
It's very
was.
much a critique of that. Yeah. The idea of a work of art, a masterpiece. Yeah.
Exactly. And so one of the key things I would say that Deleuze and Guattari, I claim, argue, and that I believe Sun Ra employed in his day-to-day life is this refusal of work, right? How the refusal of work comes into play beyond just the fact that, I mean, Ra, like half the time Ra was touring for free and just like playing shows and not receiving any pay for it. Um,
I've heard
right.
this. Yeah. Fucking it up for the rest of us. I mean, right? I don't know.
Yeah,
Putting out bad energy. No, no, no. Well, I mean, is that a refusal of work? That's a refusal of sort of labor being uh, part of the economy, I guess. I mean, I guess
Yeah,
that's sort of refusal of work in a sense because it's just making it into play, even if it is work,
and I mean,
right?
there's a lot of great texts on the refusal of work. We don't have to get into that, and that's just weird anarchist theory that I'm trying to push. But um,
is is
um,
is that does that come is Deleuze would Deleuze have a refusal of work kind of ethic?
I don't think
Perhaps.
Deleuze would have, but Gattari probably would have. He inches towards it in a few of his texts. Gattari does deal with another term that's closely related to the refusal of work is total self management, which is
Mm,
a very close term. It just means right taking control of one's life and one's powers and one's capacities. Um, and so this total self-management that Gattari deals with quite a lot in his writings, realistically, does I think play a role in how Gattari ran his orgs, plays a role in how Gattari lived his life. I mean, Gattari did not receive educational training at all, did not work at
hmm.
institutions that he didn't found, or wasn't closely related to someone who founded them, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, it sounds like Ra. I mean, yeah, Ra definitely existed out of established institutions, whether it's academia, wasn't part of the record industry.
mhm.
I just wonder about this thing though of like, uh, I mean, he did run his band uh, in a pretty, I mean, not totalitarian, but very much it's like his thing,
Yeah,
right? I mean, or I mean, as far as what I understand. So I wonder sort of how that fits in with like Deleuze's um just yeah, like what like how the working process of that band where it's completely his vision but everyone's improvising and he's working with structuring people's improvisational potentials and personalities and capabilities. Um yeah, I just want I'm trying to think of like how the Deleuzian thing of like coding, transcoding, difference sort of how that I don't know how that fits in with his working process. I'm also trying to think of how his working process was different from most people of his time. Are you a big Mingus fan? Like, you a
I
big
am
Mingus?
a big Mingus
Yeah,
fan.
because he reminds me a lot of Mingus actually. I mean, just with this sort of I don't know, just with him being a singular visionary, but then he's got all these great players who are bringing their thing to it, and there's the quote unquote organized chaos vibe, that Mingus would always have that as his tagline,
Yeah,
organized chaos.
I
Yeah,
mean, when it comes to how they live their lives with the band, I think Mingus is a great person to think about here. I mean, I grew up with like Mingus Autumn and Blues
yeah,
and Roots, right? So Mingus, I love, right? Mingus was a horrible dude,
yeah.
just
He
like
would chase
constantly.
people around with a meat cleaver, like he was straight up meat cleaver at the rehearsal. Like,
I know my favorite of his albums was recorded in a studio. It's called Charles Mingus Presents Charles Mingus.
yeah, I
However,
know that one. Yeah,
he's still in like three out of the four tracks makes a case of like telling the audience who is not there to not rattle their glasses, the ice in their glasses, and don't ring the cash register.
yeah, 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 dude. Yes.
Because he would have these anger outbursts whenever someone would make noise while he was
Yeah,
performing.
I appreciate this. I respect this. And he was asking that guy got paid for sure.
Oh, he got paid.
I don't think he was playing for free. Maybe not a ton of money, but he was definitely like
I mean, he was recording
beating
for
the
Columbia. He was doing
yeah,
fine.
beating the promoter up over that. So yeah, I mean, I wonder, it's like these ideas of like how might one live. Um, I do think of jazz in general as having this Deleuzian vibe to an extent of how it's just difference. A lot of the time, difference is sort of unresolved, and
Mhm.
there's a surplus value of like it generated from difference or generated as difference. Uh, People's playing styles that are not coming from a. I mean, there's a jazz tradition, obviously, but like
Mhm.
people's differences can rub up against each other, and there can be uh, difference experienced in an unresolved, different but not opposed to that kind of that type of difference. to me is just jazz is you really see that in jazz. I kind of, yeah, you know what I wanted to also we should get into is just looking over here is so you've talked a little bit about Afro-pessimism. Well, there's Afrofuturism and Afro-pessimism.
Mhm.
I know that Ra is a big inspiration for Afrofuturism.
Mhm.
I only know of Afrofuturism as like an aesthetic. You know what I mean? Like
Exactly.
I'm very familiar with it as like a vibe, but I
Mhm.
don't really know what the sort of philosophical. You know who I've not read, but I would really like to is Kojo Eshin. You know who I know is very like on that tip.
Yeah.
But no need to particularly talk about Kojo Eshin.
I'm not a
But
huge Eshin fan.
you're not a huge Eshin fan.
No.
Um, okay, let's hear you talk about Afrofuturism, and then if you want to like trash Kojo Eshin on my show, then I'd be very interested.
It's great for ratings. No.
Fuck Eshin, man. It's like I've like never read him. He seems awesome. I don't know.
Just fuck that guy.
Yeah,
Fucking
I
hate
want
him.
beef, man. I need to get up in the theory world by just beef with people that I've never read. That'll be my
That's
next
what I
thing.
did.
Is that how you nice?
No,
Yeah. Staying in one's lane is a bad career move. You gotta you gotta step out and just start fucking with stuff you don't know if you want to really get the clicks. But yeah no so okay, so what's
so,
Afrofuturism and how does Ra fit into that? That's what I'd love to start
so
with.
I like that you bring up these two in tandem, Afrofuturism and Afropessimism, because for me, I'm someone, and not too many people write about this really. So I like to think I'm a little unique here, but
You're
I'm
very
someone.
unique, Txgen. That's why we're taking it here.
I'm someone who thinks that Afropessimism and Afrofuturism are opposed to each other, that they cannot fit together, right? And so I think I hinted at this in my post about this stream. I think Ra is an Afro-pessimist. And so
Okay.
there's this question of like, yes, Ra influenced like the 1980, late 80s, early 90s onwards Afrofuturist, scene. But what was Afrofuturism? Afrofuturism was this white dude named Mark Durai or Dury. I don't know how to pronounce his name. I don't care to learn. Um, this guy interviewed Octavia Butler once, and then is like, you know what? Afrofuturism is a term, and I am going to name it, and I'm going to say that all of these artists, and you just list like 50 different artists or some shit, all of them are Afrofuturists.
Interesting. So it's not it's not a
No.
name that Afrofuturists so-called came up for themselves. It's actually not only from an outside. It's a white coinage or
Yeah, it's a white
from a
music
critic.
critic.
It's a music critic. Okay. Oh, it started with music. He's a music critic or no? He's a
Yeah,
theory guy.
yeah.
Oh, okay.
He's a
All right.
critic.
Right.
And so this guy came up with Afrofuturism. Like, what does that matter? To me, what this white guy.
Well, I haven't read Butler either, but I know that she's a black
Oh,
sci-fi writer whose stuff
absolutely.
it does engage race on some level, right? I mean, it's
And
about the future and it engages race and like genes and shit like that.
I by no means want to diminish black sci-fi writers who have done an amazing job and continue to do an amazing job, right? But when we take this term from sci-fi literature and bring it into music, we get something that's a little weird for me. Because the claim that Mark Durai is basically making in this term of Afrofuturism, because what he claims Afrofuturism is basically that when black people come into contact with techno culture, that this is Afrofuturism.
Right.
And when black people imagine themselves as having contact with techno culture, especially any type of techno culture, which to any other race of people, I mean, is something that we see as like 15 years away half the time, right? And so Mark Dury really does make this claim that like every time Black people come into contact with technoculture, it's like an event now that we have to acknowledge. And this isn't
Okay,
just
right.
something that Black people do
And
sometimes
and
because
there's
we
a
exist in the same world.
and that there's a very particular, the idea is that that blackness, he doesn't even say blackness, he just says black people, when they come into contact with, there's a very particular expression that happens that should have a name. It's like a name
Yeah.
for like the expression, the cultural expression of that
Mm-hmm. Right. And so
word. Okay.
this question is like, and so he specifically said, right, it's Black people, they come into contact with technoculture and then they think about the future. And that is what Afrofuturism is, right? There is no huge philosophical basis for this. There
There's
is.
Okay, yeah. There's nothing specific. It's very unspecific. It's literally just
Yeah, and
yeah.
so we have this question. Well, does Ra think about the future? Ra is very particular about this because Ra makes the claim that he does not speak about the future. Ross says it very clearly.
Okay. Yeah, he speaks about outer space.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, this is the thing. People, because he talks about outer space, people think of that as having to do with the future, but it's not necessarily.
Ra is not talking about anything with regards to the future. Ra is talking about what we need to do in the here and now. And sure, this sounds outlandish. We need to go to another planet. But what does he really mean? We need to abolish wage labor. We need to make social liberties be something that is, acceptable to anyone. And we need to have a society where Black people can live and be comfortable.
Okay, so in a way, his, you're actually saying his outer space vibe is actually in a lot of ways communist, just in the sense that, when communists say, certain types of intense communists say that they're against the world, capital T, capital W. It's like that, essentially. It's like fuck the world as it is.
Yeah, fuck the world as it is.
I mean, it's like
and
that spirit.
And not only fuck the world as it is, but Ra, in his claim of having come from Saturn, he says that he has proof that life can be this way because that is how life was on Saturn, right? And so it's not like I like to compare this to like the Mark Fisherian, like it's easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism. What Ra really is saying here is that you have to imagine the end of the world to imagine the end of capitalism, right? Because things as we know them must end, right? And he has proof that this is not the way that things must be, because this world is not all worlds, right?
Yeah, and so again, not only is he not talking about the future, well, he's talking about the future in terms of, he's talking about a potential future in terms of a past, where this is how things were on Saturn. So it's all right. Mark Fisher, he was talking about like canceled futures or non-futures, right? Being haunted by ghosts of futures that are no longer possible. But Ra is a lot less pessimistic about that, it sounds like.
He's definitely a lot less pessimistic about where the world can go.
Yeah. So okay, so he's but you said you would call him an Afro-pessimist though. So
right.
If he's got an optimistic idea of sort of what could be,
the pessimism here comes into what things were not on Saturn but on Earth, right? And not only what things were, but what things are. What Afro-pessimism says is that, I mean, it comes from this classic study Orlando Patterson did, Slavery and Social Death, it's called. And in this text, Patterson analyzes like every case of slavery that he can and discovers that what happens to a slave when they become enslaved, the second they become enslaved, they die. But it's a particular type of death, right? It's a social death. And this social death is something which for the slave produces some type of death. Oh. Sorry, am I like delayed?
You're breaking up. I hope. sort of buffering or something. But okay, but you're saying any type of slavery, the
Right.
slave when they're enslaved, they experience a certain kind of death. It's a so
Right.
cool. Okay,
Yes. So
and and yeah.
so this social death is something which is the product of a particular type of debt that the slave owes to the slave owner because the slave owner spared their life, right? The slave owner allowed for them to stay alive. So now they owe it to the slave owner to kill themselves socially and completely become subservient to them, right? And so, what Afro-pessimism steps in to say is that not only does this social death occur to the slave, but this social death has not still been remedied with the Black population on Earth today.
Okay, so it's actually not. I mean, it's not so much pessimistic as far as that there's no hope for the future. It's just sort of like a particularly dark assessment of what blackness and the black condition is right now. I mean,
Yeah.
it's sort of just like rewinding. Yeah. So it's actually, yeah. So I mean, Afro-pessimism, it's not actually that like weird or outlandish. I mean, it's not. I
No.
kind of thought Afro-pessimism had some like utterly apocalyptic kind of thing going on. It's just saying we're just that black people are just years behind where we've been acting like they are as far as condition in America or in the world. Okay, because yeah, I've been sort of so okay, Ra is an Afro-pessimist and not an Afrofuturist. So okay, so you're saying because Afrofuturism just isn't anything, basically. Is that
Kind
kind
of.
of is that kind of where yeah,
I mean,
like you just think it's kind of like a bullshit. I mean, it's sort of like a bullshit category in a way.
yeah,
Futurism,
yeah. I
Afrofuturism.
mean, I would say that like Ra is not an Afrofuturist insofar as, in the first place, what is Afrofuturism? But also, Afrofuturism kind of denies that uh, uh, effectively this notion of Afrofuturism, I feel, denies that the black person can ever be more than the slave because their dream about technoculture is something to, you know, be proud of or something.
Okay. Yeah. It's sort of it's premised on where we are now, uh, and how progress from here would be. Yeah, it's like almost fetishizing the idea of black people as being technological or more than slaves. Um, okay. Did and Ra is pessimistic, and Ra is Afro pessimist just insofar as he's just insofar as he was rolling with the Black Panthers in the 70s and stuff. I mean, is that sort of
Well, I mean, he's very clear, I think, about this about this point throughout his works, really, to make this point that black people are owed more than what we could even imagine, right? And he doesn't deal with slavery in very direct terms because he considers himself to have never been a slave because he's from Saturn, of course. Um, but he does talk about the black condition in very Afro-pessimistic terms throughout his writings and interviews. It's very interesting to see how his demeanor changes with a white interviewer or a black interviewer. Because with the black interviewer, he'll just get straight into it.
yeah. Well, yeah, it's different. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
more difficult to fully unload, and at least yeah. What is, Travis asks? Well, I think Txgen already kind of showed us, but Travis asks, where should I start if I want to get into Sun Ra's philosophy? Not too interested in the music itself. Should I be? Well, you should be interested in the music itself. I mean, I'll be honest though, like I love his music, but I don't necessarily hear everything that we've talked about in his music. I mean, I kind of do and I kind of don't, and it doesn't need to be all like obvious and apparent, you know. But
Yeah. I mean,
like yeah.
one of the things I will say is I think Danny Tompkins or I forget his last name, but there's a saxophone player for Ra's orchestra that was interviewed for a documentary that was done for him, and the player, it was John Gilmore. Uh,
Oh yeah, yeah.
uh,
He's so sick, dude. John
yeah,
Gilmore.
I forgot because they interviewed like the whole orchestra on that thing. But
Yeah.
yeah, when they interviewed John Gilmore, the interviewer's like, "Why are you playing with Ra? You're such a great saxophone player. Like what made you be with Ra?" And Gilmore's response is like, "Well, for the first 8 months, I didn't know what the fuck we were doing." Like,
Yeah.
and he was like, one night after a really long show, we were playing this tune, and I just felt it. And ever since then, I've been sold. And so it really is,
Yeah.
even for the performers, right? You don't fully get it at first. It takes a long time. For me, it took like 2 years before I could hear it, right?
Yeah, yeah. There is this element of compared to other jazz related music, there is a lot in there that just isn't jazz. I mean, just isn't even coming from the same sort of tradition. And like, I mean, I have some thoughts about this that I love. But so Travis just asked, where should I start if I wanted to get into Sun Ra's philosophy, not the music? Well, you showed that book, right? What was the
Yeah.
book you pulled out
So
that had all the that had all the
the measurable equation. It's the collected volume of his prose and poetry. Make sure you get this volume and not the other volume, because this one has the actual completed one. The other volume, it doesn't look like this. It's a black cover. I can show it to you.
yeah.
This is the other volume. They're published in the same year,
Yeah.
so it's hard to find the differences. I just have them both because I'm a completist. But
Yeah. Even in that title, hearing the Deleuze and Guattari thing, because the immeasurable equation, it's like if the equation is like the striated, the code, the measured, and then the immeasurable would be the sort of like the pure Bergson sort of becoming, the duration, the smooth space. He sort of has both of those. He sort of
yeah,
has both of those going in there. It's like rhythm versus meter, smooth versus striated. Um, yeah.
and
All right. Yeah.
it's based off of throughout Ra's life, he put out, some people might call it like a zine. It was like a booklet or a pamphlet or whatever you want to call it, right? He put out like 30 different installments of this pamphlet called The Immeasurable Equation, all with varying texts in them, varying lengths. Um, and so this is the first time that they have compiled all of the original immeasurable equation pamphlets into a single text. So it's a great place to start because it's what Ra would have wanted you to know from himself. It would have been what you got at a show if
Yeah.
you would have seen Ra and then you're like, "Fuck, I love this guy. Where do I learn more?" This would have
Yeah.
been
Yeah.
what
The
Ra would
immeasurable
have.
equation. I should check that out. Actually, yeah. I don't. I really have only checked his music and not his philosophy. Only I know from just talking to you right now. Are you a fan of Anthony Braxton? You ever get into him at
I'm
all?
not really a huge fan. I know who it is,
Not a
but
fan. Not a fan. Yeah, he's. I think that dude is just so fucking incredible. I studied with him in college a little bit,
okay,
which you wouldn't really know based on the music that I've
yeah.
come to do, but I do, I have like roots in that. He taught this course, which I did not get to take because it was after I graduated, but a course all about Sun Ra and Stockhausen, which
Yeah.
is like, I mean, that's right. I mean, if you, it's the parallels are like so many, I mean, Stockhausen I fuck with a lot, especially lately. Yeah, toward a cosmic music. Um, let's you know what? I don't I was joking about getting into talking shit on Kojo Eshin, but I'm interested in um what is the deal with Afrofuturism and Afropessimism and that kind of realm of acceleration related accelerationist quote unquote uh thought. Because
Yeah.
it's like because you were saying Afrofuturism is a stupid term, but then there are the CCRU. There's this dealing with cybernetics and stuff, and I know Kojo is sort of representing certain ideas of blackness in that realm, right? I mean,
Yeah. I mean, and I think Kudrow does a lot to try and make Afrofuturism a solidly grounded thing. I quite frankly don't agree with what he did. I feel like he should have actually studied the works that he was dealing with, because if you read the text and you know the works he's talking about, like when he talks about Ra for that chapter of more than the sun.
Yeah, I don't know. That's the thing. I haven't checked him out. I just always
Yeah,
hear the name.
yeah, more brilliant than the sun. That's what it's called. If you read like More Brilliant Than the Sun, he does something which I wholeheartedly believe, because I have evidence of it, I feel, enabled so many white readings of Ra which fetishized him. Because
Yeah.
Kudrow did not give Ra the attention that Ra deserves. Kudrow glanced over 4 albums, and like watched Spaces of the Place, and that's it. And that's all he talks about, right?
Yeah.
Kudrow does not get into a single thing of Ra's poetry, does not speak anything to Ra's life, right? And the works that now were developed from Kudrow's oeuvre are horrid. Like there are, like Tim Stutkin is the most notable one. He wrote a book right before his passing on Ra, which has probably two of the most just grotesquely racist passages, like chapters that I have ever read in a contemporary theory text.
These are from white authors or black authors?
Yeah, white authors. This is a white German dude.
Sort of along the lines of like sort of fetishizing Ra as like a sort of crazy black guy. Is that sort of the like
not just that? He has a whole chapter called Blacks with Guns, where the image for that chapter the image for that chapter is literally a black guy's dick with a gun like right above it. And the whole chapter is about how blaxploitation was actually what Ra was doing.
Right.
And he like all throughout this text is like citing Eshun in context. Like he read Eshun, you can tell. But like he's just doing the Eshun reading of Ra. And it's by no means a misreading. Like if you go through the text, it's in context, the citations he's bringing. And I feel very eerie about these types of things that we open ourselves up to if we're going to... I feel if you're going to write a text about Ra, you should be clear to bring in more than just the like, oh, he was in contact with a Moog and he, played with technology. So
it's sort of like not really checking him out on his own terms. Right. And maybe also this thing of playing with Moog synthesizers, like as though that's sort of the future, which is sort of, you're saying he's not even really that into the future anyway. It's
I mean, in Ra's words, we don't talk about the past, we don't talk about the present, we don't talk about the future, we talk about the alter time. And the alter time is what we're living in right now and what we need to push in the direction of a better world.
Yeah. So in no way disrespecting the great legacy of a great artist, do Hoteps check out Sun Ra? This is, everyone wants to know that. I mean, is he a proto Hotep? I mean, because we all give birth to stuff that we don't want to. Mike Patton gave birth to juggalos. You don't always control who your offspring are.
Hoteps don't listen to Ra. I know because I've asked.
But he's all about Egypt, though, right? He's all about
but then he talks about like being nice to people and like how like the black man isn't God and like how prostitutes are like a good thing.
He says
Not like a
that.
good, but like
Right.
he like
He's like, yeah,
like sex work is work, basically.
right.
He
He's
says,
like, they're not like hoes, bitches and hoes and shit.
yeah,
And he says the black man is not God. Um,
yes, that the
but
black person is God, which is not the same, right? Because the idea in for the Hotep, the black man is God, the black woman is Earth,
is Earth. Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Gods and Earths. Yeah, yeah, yeah. We've all listened to some Wu Tang. Yeah. Um, I mean, they're not hoteps, but they like flirt with like
They
yeah,
flirt with it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. They Wu Tang fucks with hotepism like I fuck with neo reaction. It's like not really like, you know what I mean? Like it might be on the record, but it's like no, like, um,
Yeah.
some lyrics here and there. Um, the black person is God though, huh? Did he? Huh?
In the
What?
sense of like what you think of with like the nations of gods and earth, or nation of God and earths, or whatever it is. Um, when they say like God, they mean like has control over the change of the earth, right? And then the
Mm-hmm.
earth is like what needs to be changed and what like
Yeah,
needs to be pushed into a new direction. And that's of course
yeah.
the woman who is,
That's the hotep. Yeah,
you
this is
know,
the hotep
yeah,
point of
yeah.
view.
This is
Yeah,
the
yeah,
Hotep, Hotep.
yeah.
And so if we mean here that the black person needs to do the changing of the world because no one else is going to, and because in the NGE stuff, the black people make up all of the 5% of who knows what is going on in the world, and so
NGE is
uh,
that what,
yeah, or like the 5%ers,
the
the
5%ers? Yeah, that's what Wu
yeah,
Tang is into. Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So um what was I saying? Ra very much does think that black people need to take control of their own destiny and are enabled by God to, and he uses the word God very directly, enabled by God to perform acts of change on Earth. But for him, Earth is Earth. It's
Earth is
not.
right. Okay, yeah,
It's not the
and
black woman.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Right. And there's no Christian vibe with him really. I mean, right? He's not really when he says God. Is there?
Ross a little Christian.
Yeah, he doesn't talk about Jesus really or Christ
He
or
doesn't talk about Jesus or
yeah.
Christ, but he
Seems
talks
like he
about the
would.
Bible.
Okay. But just like picking and choosing element. I mean, he like quotes it and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That was just fine. Yeah, it's. I mean, no, no. I mean, absolute. Yeah, respect. Um, yeah. I see. This might be departing into just other realms because we're already at an hour and a half. Are you in
Sure.
any particular time crunch? Because I'm not really. But
I have a reading group I have to get to at 3,
oh,
but
word. Okay. Well, because I mean, I've been checking out Fred Moton.
mhm.
One of my favorite, I mean, really becoming like, all right, I think this guy is going to be like one of my cats. And he deals with jazz pretty directly.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
his ideas of what blackness are have been really like I've been getting super into it so far as I can sort of touch the contours of it. Um, it definitely seems to go beyond black people specifically. I mean, he says he's talking about
Oh yeah.
blackness as a sort of line, almost
Mhm.
like a fugitive line.
Yeah.
Um, is he has said, yeah, if anyone doesn't know Fred Moton, I mean, he writes a lot about jazz. He writes about just everything. His stuff is kind of I hear a lot of Deleuze in his stuff. I hear
Oh
tons of
yeah, for
Deleuze in
sure.
in
For
in
sure.
in, in Moton. And so this I just think of him because he's like another person who's like drawing lines between Deleuze and jazz. Um, and he talked about some stuff like rhythm versus meter. I mean, he hasn't didn't use those words, but some of his discussion about like
Mhm.
different conductors conducting Beethoven. I was sort of have you read that thing in Black and Blur where he talks about Furtwängler versus Toscanini conducting Beethoven?
I have. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I've read the first volume of Black and Blur. I'm still
It-
working through
is that yeah,
it.
yeah, 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 Black, yeah. Yeah, that shit is so crazy to me because he's talking about Furtwängler, who's like the Nazi conductor, but
Mhm.
talking about how his conducting of Beethoven actually has more of a sense of quote unquote blackness in it based on some kind of how it negotiates difference and how it deals with sort of rhythmic variation versus just pure meter and stuff. It sort of had that it had that sense of rhythm versus meter, um,
Mhm.
and sort of transcoding versus just like one single code. Um, but he also says that he is not an Afro-pessimist, but he's considered part of. People lump him in with that, but he
Yeah.
disagrees with that. Would you consider him? I don't know. What do you think of that? Do you think he has Afro-pessimist qualities, or
I mean,
I couldn't really tell. I don't know.
I'm not going to put words in his mouth because I know he doesn't think it. Um, because he's more of the like Cornel West style of thinkers, and like Cornel West is very much not an Afro pessimist. I
At all.
love him to death, but he isn't. It's a different world, you
Well,
know.
yeah, I love him too, but I actually never really thought about him and Moton as being like really on this. I mean, he just seems Moton just seems so much further and just some
Oh, for
out
sure.
there direction. Like, but
And they have some similar elements for sure. I mean, in their writings for sure. Cornel West kind of set the earlier set the like boundaries for like writing about jazz and blackness at once, but like didn't bring in any of like the Deleuze stuff, right? So uh, uh, no, I think of it. Yeah, like I think of it in those same terms where like I want Cornel West to be an Afro pessimist. He would make a great addition to the team, but no, I don't think Fred Moton's an Afro pessimist.
Moton, the thing I get into so much about his stuff is just that his writing itself is so musical as far as just
Oh
it's
yeah,
like
oh yeah.
and not metric but rhythmic as far as
Mm-hmm.
just these blocks of different like these sort of these like I mean there's just these like vectors and lines of like increasing and decreasing speed and just how these sentences land like it really feels like jazz improvisation landing over the bar line landing on chord changes slipping over chord changes like he yeah, it's almost what Moton is almost what I imagine Deleuze is like if you read him in French, you know, which I don't read French, but
Yeah,
I really is I when I read Deleuze, I mean, it's already has a sort of rhythmic quality, aesthetic quality, even in English, but I know the French, the way they fuck with language is always so aesthetic, you know, and has
yeah.
that rhythmic quality. So yeah, I mean, Moton almost seems like his own thing as far as just like I mean, this line between poetry and theory
Mm,
being kind of blurred. Um, you write poetry too, right? Are you're a poet somewhat, or
sometimes
not as much?
I write
Um,
prose. I don't do like poetry, but
yeah. Let's
I guess
actually
published in poetry pieces.
not quickly finishing up, but just as far as the last chapter of this, let's tell people what you're working on right now. Like, what are your like straight up just projects that you've got irons of fire that you've got happening, whether it's
Yeah.
performances or texts.
So I got a performance series with my good friend Tim Sang, who I've been working with for like a year now. We have a series. It is tentatively horribly titled Lives Streams. I love it. It's
No, but no, but that's Deleuzian AF though,
uh-huh.
because live stream always that already has vitalism,
Mhm.
life, and then streams you're dealing with flows and non measured sort of vectors and becomings. So the only thing it's missing is pluralizing everything into
Mhm.
multiplicities. So you kind of had
Yeah.
to like take it to that final Deleuzian. But okay, so live streams.
Yeah, so I'm working on live streams with my collaborator and good friend Tim. Um, and that is just like a series of uh, their performances insofar as Tim and I are performers and we consider this a part of our art project. But at the same time, they're kind of just these like really cute little internet gatherings that we're putting together. Um, our next one is going to be next week on the 5th. Yeah, on the 5th from 1 to 3 p.m. PST. And so we're doing like we have Reza coming. That's like the big
Oh, that's
uh,
exciting. That's what you were talking
yeah.
about.
That's
Yeah, Reza Negarestani. I'm reading him now. I'm reading Intelligence and Spirit. He's
mhm.
like, yeah, he's one of the heaviest, I think, as far as I can tell, of this whole sort of milieu, as it were. Um, the and that's on your YouTube channel that is
Yeah,
around. Yeah,
yeah. That's on my YouTube channel, and then we have or I have writing projects that will get completed when I finally have enough energy and confidence. So I write, but I don't publish a lot. I have two main projects right now. They both don't really have names. I give them names and I change the name and I give them a different name. The content doesn't change, but it's the name that I don't know yet. Um, they're both on well, one is very much on vibrations and these like vibratory things. I'm trying to work on this notion of like a geosonics, um, which is sort of a new addition to this lineage of. It starts with Brodel's geophilosophy, right? It again gets into this or geohistory. Sorry, geophilosophy is Deleuze and Guattari. So in Fernand Braudel, a historian, French historian from post World War II era, um, wrote beautiful texts on civilization and capitalism, wrote beautiful texts on a history of Mediterranean, and he developed a concept of what he called a geohistory. Now, a geohistory comes from this concept of the longue durée, right? So if you remember duration here, it's the long duration. And so what Brodel means here by the longue durée are these very long periods of time in which slow, unknowable change occurs, right? Something that you can only know in retrospect, right? And so for Braudel, like the biggest case of the longue durée is the history of capitalism. It comes from this geo comes from this word of geology, when he's dealing with geological time, as he puts it, as opposed to a time of the event. And so doesn't get the step into this geohistory to develop a geophilosophy,
yeah. The
right?
geology of morals. Who does the Earth think it is? Right. That's one of
Mm-hmm.
those plateaus. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And there's also like there's a very long passage on geophilosophy in What is Philosophy, their last collaborative text. Um, and so what I step in here to try to do is to look at a geosonics, right? So if we're going to like use an expanded notion of and honestly, I'm probably more inspired by Brodel than I am even Deleuze and Guattari on this point. Um, Dealing with sound in these very long durations,
Mm.
um, and obviously it's harder to develop a very rigorous analysis of sound on the long scale. So I started off with not the time of events, but I'm slowly working closer and closer to this longer time,
Okay.
and trying to like do a very thorough job of like documenting each step along the way. Um, because I, being the Qatarian that I am, I love documenting early projects and then like over
Yeah.
publicizing them.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. No, this is good. Do you are you a Morton Feldman fan? You're getting to Morton Feldman?
no.
Yeah, just as far as like if we're talking about just like huge time scale pieces, these are it's one of the first, composers to be doing like 4 or 5 hour pieces, 8 hours,
Yeah.
that it's not so much it's not drone music though where it very gradually changes and you can't perceive it changing. It's not so much geological in that sense. It's more like
Yeah.
it is more like these slowly evolving things that then suddenly end, and then there's another block, and it's sort of like these long blocks of self-similar material. But it is dealing with sort of time scale, how qualitative things, how a piece qualitatively changes over a long uh, durations that are so long that they become unmeasurable in a certain sense. So, like, can't possibly experience them as measured or striated. Um, yeah.
Yeah,
Do you
and
have any
so
ideas about what music you would get into for the geosonics? Like what composers, what musicians? Do you have any specific points of reference, or is it more just pure like theory about sound?
well, it's a lot of theory about sound. Because I'm not a good critic or like a good person to like write about the music I listen to. I try every now and then, but I don't like reading myself when I talk about the music I listen to. I'd rather just like casually refer to something and then pray someone actually goes and listens to it.
Right.
Uh, but I am getting heavier into um, a lot of like Pharaoh Sanders, a lot of this like space here around Raw that was happening
Sure.
in like the 70s or 60s, you know, around that period. Um, and that takes up like the bulk of my time. Um, because for me, obviously there's not like geology in sound, right? We can't speak of sound geologies very concretely.
No.
But we can speak of strata within sound in a particularly Deleuze-Guattarian way. And so that is my like attempt to try to develop a more rigorous notion of strata's relation to the refrain.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. You could talk about strata, and you could also talk about some like I don't have an example exactly, but I think with sound you could talk about some kind of sense of like thermodynamics and like
yeah, for
pressure and
sure.
that kind of stuff. I mean, at least it just off the top of my head seems like that would be compatible in some way.
Yeah, there's definitely some elements of that that pop up in my work, like thermodynamics for sure plays a big role. And that's actually I have that kind of what leads me in my second book project where I have a project that I actually could finish this summer if I really put my mind to it, but who knows? Maybe I won't. Um, and right now, I've given it the preemptive title of accelerationism in light of the notions of dissipation and refrain. Which is a variation on a Simondon title, individuation in the light of notions of the of form and information. Um, but
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I've not read Simon Dunn. I feel like if we start going on an acceleration thing, it's just gonna turn it's gonna get like just 2 more hours. Um, I mean, you know, because it's like we didn't really go there except insofar as we talked about Kojo Eshin a little bit,
yeah,
but yeah, I could definitely see how dissipation would fit in with acceleration. I'd be really interested to hear how this notion of refrain gets into it. But in any case, I'm looking for questions. There's really not. I think we've answered all the questions here that are really worth even vaguely entertaining here. Uh, this wasn't the best comment section, but what are you gonna do? I'm always glad people are tuning in no matter what. Um, but yeah, word. All right. Well, I know we could always talk for hours, Txgen.
we could.
You're a fount. You're a never-ending thermodynamic fount. Yeah, let's I don't know. Let's I feel like we could tie it up, you know.
Yeah,
Yeah. So yeah, definitely yeah, tune into Tegan's channel. She's got I mean, it's like really as far as, you know, people have this meme now of like this sort of Deleuze meme about like explain Deleuze to me like down, I'll kill you, I'll fucking kill you, don't dumb it down. And your channel really does actually explain Deleuze. I mean, in some of the more lucid, yeah, ways. I mean, this conversation you did a ton to elucidate stuff in your own channel. Like, really, it's like you can actually check out the refrain thing and actually get what that's about. Yeah, I recommend everyone to go check that. Um, word. Well, I guess yeah. I'll tune into this thing. This thing you're doing. When is it? When is the thing with Reza again that you said?
It's like it's basically an internet gathering that we're streaming and doing weird things on top of on our
Yeah.
computers.
When's that happening?
Oh, when? It's May 5th, 1 to 3 p.m. PST.
May 5th. Okay, I'm gonna be there for sure. I'm gonna check that out.
If you
Well,
want to come talk to Reza, just let me know. We can send you an invite link.
oh word, you mean like be in the split screen?
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be cool. I would love that. Yeah, send me an invitation. I'll hop in there. Fuck yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, Txgen. So, word. Thanks so much for being here. Hope you enjoyed it. I certainly did.
Yeah. No, it's been great. I love talking with you.
Yeah, likewise. All right. Hang in there with
All right.
quarantine. I guess I'll see you on the 5th.
Yeah. I'll see you then.
Tight. All right.
All right.
Bye.
See ya.
See ya.